The biggest illusion is not that we are weak. The biggest illusion is that we exist separately. Ego is not power. Ego is a glitch. You don't grow by adding more identity. You grow by deleting the noise. When the I becomes silent, reality finally speaks. Not me, only you. When I disappear, truth appears. As long as a human being believes I am the center, he lives in tension, because he believes he is the cause. But in the knowledge of the real, cause is not the point, being a channel is the point. I observed in my journeys that the greatest ones were not honored for their ego, they were honored for their emptiness. They were empty enough for the infinite to flow through them without distortion. So, when I say not me, only you, I am not teaching surrender as a poetic line. I am teaching a correction of perception. Existence is not about possessing the moment. Existence is about passing the moment through you. The person who says I am the doer is misreading reality. Action is not created by you. Action happens through you. My teacher once asked me, Ibn Arabi, what is the weight of your existence? And I answered, the weight of my existence is zero, and the weight of truth is infinite. Only when zero stays zero can it carry the infinite. Fana does not mean destroying yourself. It means switching reference. You will still speak, choose, decide, but you will know that the origin of the decision was never your personal self. You were only the delivery point, not the source. This is the moment where the real is understood. I was never standing in front of God. I was always standing inside. Gaudiya thought I was calling the divine, but the line was already connected. My ego was just static on the frequency. In the static clears, the original signal becomes clearant. This is why I say, when I disappear, truth appears best. I was fog, and the truth is pure light. This is the secret, this is the knowledge, and this is the real unlocking of existence. Highest spiritual rank is not elevation. The highest spiritual rank is disappearance. When you finally understand that you are not the origin, but the channel. The entire way you interpret your own life shifts from strain into flow, because most people unconsciously believe that they are personally generating all their actions, all their outcomes, all their breakthroughs, and all their failures, and because of that belief, they carry unnecessary weight on the mind, unnecessary pressure on the chest, unnecessary tension under the skin. They live like a generator. But the truth of existence is that you are not a generator. You are a transmitter. You are a medium. You are a passage through which the real expresses itself. And this is not about being passive. This is not about being lazy. This is not about saying, I do not need to work. No, this is about recognizing where the actual power originates from. The lamp does not create electricity. The lamp only expresses it. The wire does not create current. The wire only conducts it. And the human being in the metaphysics of the real is exactly like that. The ego believes, if I do not force, if I do not push, if I do not control, then nothing will happen. But that is because ego is addicted to the feeling of ownership. Ego wants to feel like author, and yet the wisest shift is when you realize the beauty of being used by the source and not having to pretend that you are the source yourself. And this is why those who are humble are not weak, they are efficient. Humility is not smallness. Humility is frictionless conductivity. Ego blocks flow. Identity creates static. Identity creates resistance. But emptiness becomes a clean channel where the infinite does not need to break walls first to pass through. So, when you say, I am not the origin, I am the channel, you are not deleting responsibility, you are elevating responsibility, because you no longer take pride in the illusion that your mind, your logic, your strategy is the only engine of movement. Now you understand that intention is your domain. But actualization is from beyond. You choose alignment, and alignment is enough, and the moment alignment is real, then flow takes over and movement becomes effortless, and the actions that come through you become cleaner, because they are not contaminated by insecurity, not contaminated by fear, not contaminated by validation, hunger. And the difference between action that is ego-generated and action that is source-channeled is the difference between turbulence and glide, because ego fights its way through reality, wrestles with each outcome, but the channel simply becomes a witness to movement without needing to inflate a personal identity from that movement and this creates a paradox in the mind of the ego, because the ego will say, if I let go, if I stop owning the outcome, then maybe nothing will happen, and yet the opposite unfolds when ownership dissolves. Action becomes more elegant, more intelligent, more aligned, and this is why many people who live in extreme effort and extreme hustle experience burnout, because they assume force equals creation, but the ancients, the mystics, the saints, the enlightened ones knew that force is not creation, force is compensation for not being aligned with source. So when you shift from origin to channel, life becomes lighter, not emptier, but lighter, because you realize you are never meant to carry the full weight of fate on your tiny shoulders. You are meant to allow the infinite to pass through you like wind through a flute. And what does a flute do? It does not fight the air, it only shapes it into music. And what does the human do? When ego dissolves, it shapes the flow of the real into expression, and the music of existence plays through you effortlessly. And this is the essence of actual power, not personal force, but divine conductivity. Emptiness is not weakness, emptiness is capacity, because the universe cannot pour new wisdom into a vessel that is already full of its own noise, and this is why the greatest beings were not the ones who claimed to know everything, they were the ones who made space inside their identity. They unlearned more than they learned, they deleted more than they added, they allowed the unnecessary layers of self to fall away so the infinite could enter without resistance. But in modern culture, people are taught the opposite. They are taught to accumulate identity, accumulate narrative, accumulate labels, to become someone, to brand themselves, to declare who they are and what they stand for. But the ancient truth is different. The ancient truth says, do not become heavier, become lighter, because heaviness blocks flow. Identity is weight, and weight slows spiritual velocity. Identity becomes a container made from ego, and ego has limited capacity, so whatever enters that container becomes trapped inside a small volume. But emptiness is not a container, emptiness is an open field, emptiness is the sky, not the jar, emptiness is the ocean, not the cup. So the more identity you remove, the more allow the infinite to expand inside you without boundaries. It is the difference between being a puddle and becoming the sea. It is the difference between holding a spark and holding entire lightning inside your nervous system. So emptiness is not a void that needs to be filled, emptiness, a readiness for the real to pass through without distortion. Distortion only happens when self-interpretation interferes. The infinite tries to speak, but the ego translates it into self-image, and self-image mistranslates the message. But when self is silent, the message passes pure like light through a clean diamond. So the masters protected their emptiness, they guarded their inner space, because they knew that the moment a person begins to think they are the source, the infinite stops flowing, not because the infinite is limited, but because ego cannot conduct infinite frequency. Ego can only conduct a tiny low bandwidth, but emptiness can carry the full signal. So capacity is not about how much you know, it is about how much space you have inside for truth to enter. Capacity is not about how much content you store, it is about how much identity you have removed. The more you remove, the more room you create. Because in spiritual physics, addition is not power, subtraction is power. Subtraction creates room, subtraction creates openness. Subtraction is the secret of transcendence, and this is why real masters are calm, not because nothing happens around them, but because they're not cramped inside their own name, their own narrative, their own history. They have internal space, they have psychological gravity. The universe can drop massive insight, massive clarity, massive inspiration into their heart, and they have room to receive it without breaking. Most people cannot receive the infinite because they are stuffed full of themselves. They want truth, but they have no internal space to hold truth. Truth needs a vessel that is not rigid, not crowded, not loud. Emptiness is the silence in which revelation becomes audible. Emptiness is the readiness in which grace becomes possible. Emptiness is the openness where destiny can rewrite your coordinates without needing to negotiate with your ego first. So the path of becoming more is actually the path of becoming less noise, less narrative, less identity, less self-explanation, less mental clutter, less personality demand, less performance in front of the world, because the one who is full of themselves cannot carry the infinite. The one who empties themselves becomes capable of holding an entire universe inside their chest. This is the paradox. the world does not reward emptiness, but the heavens do. The earth wants personality, but the real wants pure space, because pure space is the throne of truth and emptiness is the seat where the infinite sits inside a human being. Surrender is not about dropping your power. Surrender is about correcting the lens that tells you where the real power is coming from, because the ego thinks surrender means giving up, but the mystic knows surrender means aligning correctly, and when alignment is correct, the energy that moves through you is infinitely stronger than anything your separate self could manufacture by force, because surrender is not collapse. Surrender is calibration. It is the shift from I am the cause to I am the passage. It is the moment when the hand finally understands that the impulse moving the fingers is not coming from the finger itself. So surrender is not passive resignation. Surrender is the highest form of intelligent cooperation with the real, because the human mind is like a tiny radio receiver and the source is like a cosmic broadcast, and when you surrender, you are not shutting the radio off, you are tuning the dial properly so the signal becomes clean and the distortion drops away. And this is why people who live in resistance live in noise. Resistance creates static. Resistance creates friction. They try to bend reality according to their idea of how reality should be. They push, they force, they grind, and they wonder why their outcomes remain limited. But surrender is the art of recognizing that reality is already moving, reality is already expressing, reality is already flowing. Your job is not to make reality move, your job is to remove the interference that blocks its flow. Though surrender is perception correction, not self-deletion. When the ego tries to claim origin, creates a bottleneck the infinite tries to pass through, but the self tries to own it, to brand it, to personalize it, and the current gets narrowed by the identity that tries to contain it. But surrender removes the small container. Surrender opens the channel. Surrender says, I do not need to hijack the flow, I only need to cooperate with the flow. And cooperation is not defeat, cooperation is power at scale, because if the wave is already moving, the surfer does not need to create the ocean, he only needs to match the rhythm of the sea, and the sea carries him farther than his ego legs could ever swim. So surrender is surfing, not drowning. Surrender is riding, not sinking. Surrender is harmonizing with the real pattern that is already unfolding inside existence, and this is why the mystics say surrender is the beginning of real intelligence, because the ego looks at life like a battlefield, but the surrendered soul looks at life like a river, and a river does not need to be forced. The river is already heading toward the ocean. All the river needs, the path without blockage, and so does the human consciousness. It is already designed to return to the infinite. It is already coded to align with the real. But ego builds dams, ego builds walls, ego builds stories, ego builds expectations, and then complains about lack of flow. Though surrender is the deleting of these walls. Surrender is the deletion of the false idea that I must push the universe into my desired shape. Surrender is the realization that the universe already has a shape, and my freedom is discovered when I align to that shape, because alignment makes a human invincible, not through personal dominance, but through cooperation with something larger than their measurable self. So surrender is perception correction, not self-collapse, and once a person sees this clearly, surrender becomes the most rational decision, because why would a tiny isolated self choose to keep lifting a boulder alone when an infinite force is ready to carry it through you, not instead of you, but through you? This is the difference. You do not disappear into uselessness, you disappear into usefulness. You do not vanish into emptiness, you vanish into capacity, and once this correction lands inside your chest, you realize surrender is not defeat. Surrender is the highest form of strategic intelligence in existence. Disappearance, the highest elevation, because the ego thinks elevation means becoming more visible, but the mystic knows elevation means becoming less obstructive, because the ego wants height, but truth wants transparency, and transparency only happens when the eye becomes thin enough that the infinite can shine through, without bending, without discoloring, without interruption. So elevation in the spiritual domain is not like climbing a mountain, it is like melting into air, because the mountain stands in the way of the horizon, but the air becomes the horizon itself, and the one who dissolves the identity becomes part of the real instead of standing in front of it and claiming a separate position that never existed in the first place, and this is why those who try to make themselves great never taste greatness, because greatness is not in the one who stands in the spotlight, greatness in the light itself, and the light only appears in its purest form when the person holding the lamp disappears from the frame. If the photographer stands in front of the lens, the picture is blocked, and if the ego stands in front of the real, the truth gets blocked. So disappearance is not losing yourself, disappearance is removing the block that never belonged to the real in the first place. Disappearance is subtracting the false so the true can reveal itself, like sculpting a statue. By cutting away the stone that is not the statue, the master does not add pieces to make the sculpture, the master removes pieces so the sculpture hidden inside can appear. So the climb to the highest macam is not the hustle of personal branding, it is the subtraction of personal narrative, it is the dismantling of the commentary that says, look at me, I did this, I planned this, I achieved this. Because every time the ego says, I did it, darkness increases, because the ego becomes a shadow in front of the light. But every time the ego says it happened through me, the shadow dissolves, because the light is allowed to pass unobstructed. So elevation is not inflation, elevation is disappearance. Inflation, a balloon full of air, flight without substance, but disappearance is like a star that seems tiny, but holds nuclear fire inside, and the more invisible the ego becomes, the more visible the truth becomes. And this is why the highest saints, the highest mystics, the highest enlightened ones never marketed themselves, because the sun does not need a spotlight. The sun is the spotlight, and the one who aligns to the sun becomes sunlight, not the storyteller of sunlight. So disappearance is not a tragedy, disappearance is fulfillment. It is the completion of the equation, where the variable cancels itself so the constant can appear, and the pure cause can finally be seen without the noise of the intermediary claiming the credit, because all the ego can do, block and bend the beam of the infinite. But the surrendered heart becomes a prism that passes the full spectrum of reality into expression without taking personal ownership of the spectrum. So elevation is not a podium, elevation is a vanishing act. The highest throne is occupied by the one who no longer occupies anything. The highest rank is given to the one who no longer asks to be ranked. The highest crown fits only on a head that has emptied itself of personal weight, because a crown cannot sit steady on a head that is inflated with its own importance, but a silent empty head becomes a perfect support for the weight of the infinite. So, when the mystic disappears, the real appears. When the self disappears, the truth becomes visible. When the I disappears, the presence becomes audible. So the final miracle is not that you become more, the final miracle is that you become less, because the less you are, the more the real becomes, because you are never meant to be the destination, you are always meant to be the passage. This is the paradox. The world teaches, become somebody, but the real teaches, become nobody, because nobody is capacious enough for the infinite to become everybody through you.